So, hello again, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our February webinar. My name is Megan Lebeda, and I'm a program developer here at Kirkwood Corporate Training. Katie Montbryan, a Minnesota native, returned to Midwestern roots in 2018 when her husband co-founded a commercial HVAC company here in Cedar Rapids. With 15 years of experience as a consultant and Fortune 500 leader, she saw an opportunity to build something of her own. And now, as the founder of Rewire Collective, she helps individuals navigate the messy middle of career and life transitions through coaching, speaking, and community. So thank you all for joining us. We're really excited about today's session, and I'm going to pass it right over to you, Katie.
Thank you so much. And when we picked this topic, I didn't realize how perfect the timing was going to be, holding this session a couple of days before Valentine's Day. So I'm really happy to be here today talking about self-compassion. And not only do we have Valentine's Day right around the corner, but starting off this year, it feels like there's just a lot of things changing, a lot of things in flux. And there's so much happening in our environment. People are losing jobs or feeling really uncertain about the future. AI has been upending industries at a very rapid pace. I'm hearing about AI all the time in the work that I do. And there's everything else in the news, which we're not going to talk about today. But with so much going on outside, it can be really easy to internalize and kind of clamp down, almost like we're bracing ourselves for the worst case. And that mindset doesn't really help us move forward. So, great time to talk about self-compassion. And when I say self-compassion, what I mean is, this isn't the talk about spa days or face masks or any of those types of things. It's really about resilience and helping yourself through challenges. And I like to think about it in the way that you would help a friend through something. So being that friend to yourself that you would be to other people. And it's about finding little ways to be kind to yourself, truly, no matter what is going on around you. So that's exactly what we're going to talk about today. When everything's changing, how do you embrace self-compassion? So a little bit of an overview about what we'll be covering today. We'll talk about transitions. We'll talk about how they impact us. We'll talk about the journey from here to there and what that looks like. And we'll close with a really fun little exercise where you'll write yourself a thank you note from the future, which is one way that you can bring some self-compassion into your life today. And we'll have a tool that you can share also if you think that that's fun. I know we set this up as a webinar, but it's really meant to be an interactive session. So I'll talk a little bit, but what I'll be asking you to do throughout the session is think about your own reflection, think about your own journey, and bring these activities to life for yourself. So to that end, we have a worksheet that you can download at the link that was just dropped in the chat. If you go to the page, there's a little thing that says download PDF. Grab the PDF copy. This will have all the places that you need for your notes and kind of your reflections throughout the session. We'll attach it to the video for anyone who's watching the replay. But my one caveat with that is either save it to your computer or download it and print it. Because if you try to work on it straight from your browser tab, if you navigate away, you'll lose all of the great reflections and things that you put in there. So take a moment to grab your copy if you haven't done so already. And if you have any trouble with that, let us know and we'll figure out how to troubleshoot for you. So before we get into the meat of self-compassion, I did want to take a moment to quickly introduce myself and the concept of a rewire, which is a word you'll see a lot on my slides and you'll hear me talking about rewires. So a rewire, as we define it, is a moment of clarity, which often happens in the middle of a career or toward the end of a career, where you decide to use your time and energy differently. And it could be moving to a new job, dealing with a layoff or a change in your family or health. It could be starting a new company or thinking about an encore or a second act. And what's in common across all of these different changes is this conscious decision to make the next chapter of your life different and more purposeful than the previous chapter or the current chapter. So rewires tend to be big changes, and the journey can be tough. The conversation that we'll have today about self-compassion and all of the things that we'll share is based on the work that my partner and I have been doing to help people through all of these different types of rewire journeys. And truly, the content and the concepts are applicable to any change, any challenge, any transition that you're facing. So a little bit about me and my partner in the Rewire Collective. Samantha wasn't able to join us today, but we've both been through our own rewires. I came from a successful corporate career and left a few years ago to start out on my own path. My partner left her corporate career and became an executive coach a few years ago. And we've come together to help people figure out their own rewires. We've done hundreds of hours of workshops, trainings. We both know how to lead these transformations, whether it's inside of a big company, which was the work that we did before, or working with individuals as they figure out their own next chapter. So I mentioned rewires are about shifting and focusing on purpose. And for me, this work is deeply purposeful, and I couldn't be more excited to share it with you today. So let's actually start talking about rewires. And I may ask if you can drop that link in the chat one more time for anybody who joined a little bit late, then they can grab their copy of the worksheet before we really get into it. So as we start, I want to do a little bit of a thought experiment. And I'm guessing the title of this workshop spoke to you because you're experiencing some sort of a change in your life. So I want you to take just a moment to think about what's on the other side of the change you're experiencing right now. And that change could be something you're driving or something that's happening in your environment, any of that list of things that I talked about a little bit previously. So put yourself in the mindset of being on the other side of that change. Think about if you were thriving there. And we'll stay here for just a minute. I want you to think about it, and then you can capture your notes on your worksheet about what does it mean to be thriving on the other side of this change. Okay. So wrap up your notes on that. We'll come back to thinking about the future later on during the session. So talking about transitions and change. One of the things that I've noticed in all these conversations we have, and truly in my own life, is we tend to expect the picture that you see on the left. And what I mean by that is when we have a transformation happening in our lives, we want it to be neat and tidy, and we want there to be a specific answer on the other side. Like there's this moment of clarity that you'll know exactly what the right answer is, and you'll move forward without hesitation, and you'll have this surety of what you're going to be doing. So an example to put this into real terms, if you are unhappy at your current job, your expectation might be that before you leave that job or before you make any moves out of it, you want to have the perfect job that meets all of your salary expectations, and it's remote because that's what you prefer, and you've already interviewed and landed the job, and you do all of that before you even tell the current job that you're leaving. And that's not how it happens most of the time. Usually there's a little bit of something else that's going on when we're thinking about a big transition. So realistically, what often happens is the picture on the right, where the transition moment or the change acts like a prism where something comes in, whatever experience you're having, and then there are these different vectors of light that come out of it, and there are different paths that you could take. So it's not just one perfect answer, it's this spectrum of things that you could do or paths that you could follow. And the story I like to share about this, these set of images came from my own experience in my own life. was after I left my corporate career, I knew that my path forward wasn't going to be there. And then I left, and I thought I would have this insight, this moment that looked like the thing on the left-hand side. So I tried everything I could think of to induce that moment to happen. I thought about what are all the ways that people have moments of inspiration and moments of clarity, and I tried to do them all. I went to the Grand Canyon and hiked to the bottom of the canyon and thought, maybe I'll have my moment here. I drove the coast of California and sat and stared at the ocean and thought, maybe I'll have my inspiration in this place. I got really radical about it and went to a 10-day silent meditation retreat, thinking, if I get quiet enough, I'll have this moment of clouds will part and the sun will shine down on me, and I'll know exactly what my next path looks like. And none of that happened. And I kept getting frustrated because I was thinking, if I do enough of the right things, if I take the steps, I will have the moment of clarity and I will know. And instead, what happened was, along all of those paths that I followed to find my clarity, I would get a piece of information or some nugget of insight about myself and what I liked and what I didn't like. And I was assembling all of these different data about what I wanted my chapter to be like. And at the end, I didn't have one answer. I had a set of answers that gave me all of these different possibilities and directions I could go in. And then my job was to start experimenting and figure out, which of the paths was the path I wanted to take. So really, when we're in these big transitions, that's often what happens is there's a bunch of different potential outcomes, and you have to pick one that's a little bit messy and not necessarily perfect, and you won't always have this clarity that looks like that beautiful pink gemstone on the left. And we're talking about big life changes today. We're talking about jobs and stuff happening in the environment around us and industries changing, moving potentially. So all of these things come with pretty big implications for the rest of our lives. When we're talking about jobs or moves or any of these things, there's a big financial impact that typically happens. We're making these choices and moving forward with the burden of finances on our back. There's an identity thing that happens. So especially if you've been in your career for a while, or if you've been in any position for a while, and position could be parent or spouse or sibling. If you change that, or if that changes, who are you? If you're not the head of marketing, who are you? If you're not running the PTA or running the organization that you care about, how do you introduce yourself at a party? What are you about if you're not doing the thing that you've been doing? So it's almost like an identity crisis gets sparked. Our networks change. So if you've been part of a social construct, whether that's at work, in your community, in your organizations that you volunteer with, and then you change that, all of those relationships become a little bit different. If you've been really enmeshed in a corporate environment, your colleagues from your past work aren't going to play that same role in your life in the future. And it can be hard to figure out, how do you unwind old relationships and build new relationships during these transitions? There's a piece, the fourth piece here is about all of the habits and all of the patterns that you've built in your life today. So an example of, if you're working, you probably have the place you stop for coffee in the morning and the people you talk to at the coffee shop. You might have a place you go walking at lunch, or a place that you stop on your way home and pick up dinner, or stop and go to the gym. And you've built all these different things that you do. And then when we're talking about one of these changes, if you change where you work, if you change how you go about your day, you have all of these little things around it that are now going to be different and now have to be revisited. And then finally, there's a balance that shifts between work and life and all of these other things. As you're upending one piece, all the other pieces get touched a little bit. So you have money and identity and who's around us and habits. And all of these things, when they come together and they start to shift, it affects us internally in a really big way. So this is where we'll get into thinking about why we need self-compassion. This is the reason right here. Uh, the ways that this all shows up for people and the things that are happening to us when we're in one of these transitions or in one of these times of change are, it can be very easy to feel like you're lost, especially if you've transitioned out of one thing and you haven't yet started the next thing. Like that time I described when I knew that my next thing wasn't at that particular company. I didn't know what it was going to be yet. It's easy to feel like you don't have a map, you don't have a path. You know, I tried all those things to help me get clarity there, but it didn't necessarily work. So you're in a middle zone that feels very gray. Loneliness shows up a lot for people in these circumstances because you likely don't have people around you who are going through the same thing that you're going through. So if you've left a job or an organization, those people were with you during a certain set of circumstances. If you're now doing something different, it feels strange to reach out to them, especially if you don't have answers, especially if you're in the middle of this time of not knowing what's next for you. And we often end up isolating ourselves because we don't have our old networks to rely on. We don't yet have a new network if we don't know what's coming next. So you don't have community to tap into, and that can feel really lonely for people. The third thing is we can feel a lot of uncertainty and doubt. You can question yourself. You wonder if you're making the right choices. One thing I've heard from a lot of people is you have these unexpected voices that come up as you're sitting here pondering, thinking about what's next or thinking about change that tend to be quite critical. And if you dig into it, you can figure out, hey, that voice that came up, that was actually my boss from 3 jobs ago who was telling me, I wasn't good enough, I wasn't smart enough, no wonder you're struggling. And it's this strange thing where your brain fills up empty space with voices and with conversations that are from your past. And it's surprising once you actually figure out who it is. And this especially happens when things get quiet. So if you work in a field or if you have a life where you have a lot of activity, phone calls coming in, messages, emails, all of these ways that your brain is entertained throughout the day with people reaching out. If that stops, you have more quiet time, you have more reflection time, but your brain's not used to it. So it'll come up with things to entertain yourself. It will be positive things sometimes. You might be thinking about possibilities, or it could be negative things, like when that boss comes back to say critical things to you that aren't helpful in your journey. So that's what, when I talk about uncertainty and doubt, that's kind of what's happening. And then the last piece here is there can be a lot of shame and guilt. There's a lot of stuff wrapped up in feeling like you need to be a certain way for certain people. You don't want to be letting people down. You don't want people to view you differently because you've changed something about your life. So all of this together on this slide can make you feel really crummy. And when you're figuring out where you want to go and how you want to get there, this stuff that's happening inside of our heads truly is not helpful. While we're on this topic of emotion and internal impact, I pulled this slide in from one of our other workshops that we do, which is about layoffs and the different reactions that people have to the news of a layoff. And I brought it here because I think it can be applicable to a variety of changes. when we're talking about layoffs, and I'm assuming most people on this call have probably been on one end of that layoff table, either doing the layoff or being laid off, there's an emotional reaction that happens. And typically it's a pretty strong reaction up front. There's this initial shock, fear, anger, frustration. There's a thing that comes out when you first get the news and you feel a little fiery. Then people will move into a next stage, which maybe the news of the layoff has set in. They're feeling some sadness, maybe confusion, embarrassment. It's kind of the anger has subsided, but the bad feelings are still there. And then eventually you get to a place of hope and optimism, and you're feeling excited about what's next and you're ready to move on. But what happens is this isn't a linear ABC path that people go through. It's very much cyclical and you bounce around. And it could be one day you wake up and you've got all of this energy and excitement about, applying for jobs and networking and doing all these things. And the next day you wake up and you have crippling anxiety and you can't even get out of your bed to apply for one job. And I wanted to share this because all of that is very normal and very natural. So if you're feeling a change happening around you, or if you're moving through a change, and one day you're very excited about it, and the next day you're full of fear and anxiety and questioning every decision you've ever made in your whole life that brought you to this moment, and then the next day you're a little sad because of something you're leaving behind. There's no right way to do this. There's no path that is common for everybody. What is common in all of these journeys and all of these experiences is truly that you move through it and you move back and you move forward, and it is very iterative and it's all part of the process. So we've talked about what happens internally and externally when things are changing. I've shared a lot of information with you about what's happening inside and shared a few stories. So I'll pause here and give you a chance to just reflect on, what are you learning from this? What are you taking from this? There's a space in your worksheet for notes if you want to drop them there. And I know we're set up as a webinar, but I would love to hear from some of you if you're willing to share in the chat what you're kind of learning as we go through this first part. So I'll give you a minute to drop your notes in the chat if you're willing. All right. Typically what we hear from people when we have this conversation is, did you read my mind? You put all the things that I'm feeling on paper. This is kind of exactly what's happening for me. So hopefully this is resonating with you, and it feels like some of the things that are coming up now have a name and now have a picture associated with them as we talk about changes and transitions. So if you haven't yet captured your notes on your worksheet, take a moment to do that, and then we'll shift into talking about the journey. Okay. So we're going to do another little thought exercise here. And I want you to think about a time where you were learning something new and possibly difficult. So get that picture of something that you tried that was new and hard into your head. Like, really bring yourself there, think about it, imagine what was around you. And once you have that, I want you to think about and capture, what were the emotions that you were feeling And what were some of the conversations that you were having with yourself as you were trying this new difficult thing? So I'll give you a moment to think about it. If you're able to drop some of your thoughts in the chat, I'd love to see them. Oh, I'm getting a note from someone that we think the chat might not be turned on. So if you're not able to chat, you can always drop questions into the Q&A if you want to share your thoughts. Otherwise, maybe we can get the chat turned on so people can share their thoughts along this journey.
Sorry,
But
everyone, it's turned on my end, so I'll do some digging and see why you can't post anything.
okay, thank you for checking on that. In the interim, I'll just pull from what I usually hear from people. Oh, here we go. All right, so thank you for troubleshooting that so quickly. That was amazing. So anyone who wants to share thoughts on when you're doing something difficult for the first time, how do you talk to yourself? Go ahead and drop that into the chat. What I usually hear from people about this particular question is when I'm trying something new, I have a conversation with myself that has a lot of shoulds in it. So I should be further along. I should already know how to do this. I should be faster. All of those types of things where I should be able to do more than what I am doing today. And my next question for everybody is if you have kids, think about with your kids, teaching them how to ride a bike or teaching them how to do something new that's hard. If you don't have kids or if you haven't been around this situation, think about teaching someone how to do a hobby or something that you're passionate about. Like, for example, making sourdough bread, which we were talking about just before we hopped on this call. So bring that situation into your head in the same way that we had just talked about the learning journey that you went on. And now that you're imagining it, what kind of conversation were you having and what kind of emotions were coming up as you watched your child learn how to ride their bike or as you watched your friend try to bake their first loaf of bread? What kinds of things would you potentially be saying to them? And capture those in your worksheet or drop them in the chat. I'd love to see some of what you might say to a kid that's trying to ride a bike for the first time. Brittany, you got this. Yep. Keep trying. It's okay. No one's a rock star to start with. It'll come. Good job. This is fun. I knew you could do it. Going faster is safer. There's a lot of encouragement that comes up when you're trying to help someone else learn how to do something for the first time. Keep pushing. You got this. I should just have you run this scroll whenever I'm trying to do something new for the first time. So proud of you. Take a deep breath. You're going to do great. I know we didn't hear from everybody on the first question, but is this potentially different than what you thought about for your own example? Are these the things you were saying to yourself when you were going through that difficult learning situation or trying something new for the first time? I'm guessing it's probably a little bit different of a conversation. So what are you learning from thinking about these two situations? You learning something new and teaching a kid to do something new. Yeah, very different. And I wonder why it is that we have such different conversations, because immediately asking all of you how to talk to a kid who's riding a bike, you had so much to say that was positive and encouraging. But we've all been here, right? We're so much harder on ourselves when we're learning than we are on other people, whether it's our kids. We're probably very different with our colleagues when we're giving them advice and encouragement. If it's a friend, we talk to them differently than we talk to ourselves. You wouldn't tell a friend who calls you for advice, well, you should have been farther along. Why didn't you do this 4 weeks ago? You would say one of the things that you said to the child, keep pushing, you got this, you'll figure it out. So I want to take a moment to remind you that whatever change you're in and whatever thing is happening in your life that drew you to this session about change, you've actually never been in this position before. You've never been in this environment with these people at this age going through this change. So even if it's like something you've done before, this is your first time walking this particular path. So there's no reason to think that you should have it already figured out, right? You've got a whole bunch of other things in the past that you figured out, but this is the first time that you're going through this particular thing. So I want you to just take a minute to think about what you might take away from this conversation about how we learn and how we treat other people who are learning before we move on to the last section. So you can capture your notes in the worksheet, or if you have anything that you want to share with the group, I would love to hear that too. Okay, well, let's keep moving. In the Rewire journey, or in any of these journeys that we're talking about, because we're all going through change and we're going through transition, we start in this green bucket where we're living our old life and we're starting to have a moment of awakening, realizing that we want to make a change or we need to make a change, and we're starting to reflect and plan. And I'm guessing this is where many of us are today. So we're in this first bucket. The right side of the slide is what I asked you to think about at the very beginning of this session. So if you remember back to a half an hour ago, I asked you, what does it mean to be thriving in your new life? What would that look like? And most of us are in this middle phase where we're starting to think about it. We've made a plan. We're starting to make changes. Maybe we're iterating a little bit. But the piece in the middle tends to be kind of messy. And it's where we're learning how to ride the bike. So if you think about a change like riding a bike, you can watch all the videos you want. You could read a book about how to ride a bike. You could think about how to ride a bike. You can plan how you're going to ride the bike. But once you actually get onto the bike, you're still wobbling around and you're not certain, and you'll probably fall off the bike a couple times as you're figuring it out. Maybe you'll scrape a knee. Something's going to happen. You're not going to go straight from, I've got a plan to ride my bike, to you're out riding your bike. So there's always a messy middle, and there's always stuff that happens as we're going through a big change. As you think about your own future path between today and the future state that we talked about at the beginning of the session, think about 3 things that you might be facing, struggles that might come up, challenges. Maybe it's things that you'll put in your own path, mindsets that come up, limiting beliefs, anything. And pick 3 things. So imagine 3 things that could come up on this journey for you. And you've got a space in your worksheet where you can capture them. If you didn't grab the worksheet, just write them down on a piece of paper somewhere. But we want to think about 3 tangible, specific things that could come up for us in this, we call it lovingly messy middle phase. So take a moment and do that. And thank you. If you need the worksheet, we've just dropped the link into the chat again, so you can go there and grab your copy. And that'll give you all the spaces to fill out your work and reflections today. Okay, hopefully you've had enough time to think about your 3 things and capture them either in the worksheet or on your paper. With these challenges in mind, let's talk about some ways that you can practice self-love and be kind to yourself during transition and during periods of change. So the first one is self-compassion, which I know is a word we used at the beginning of the session. And the simplest way that I like to think about self-compassion is being as nice to yourself as you would be to a friend. And that could be about how you talk to yourself. That could be how you take care of yourself. It could be giving yourself grace for not moving as fast as you would like to move. It could be celebrating the little things that come up along the way. You fell off the bike. Okay, you get yourself back on the bike. But it's really catching things and reframing them in the way that you would do for a friend. So the exercise here, the way to think about this is the better you can pay attention to what's happening inside, that talk track, that boss from 3 jobs ago who keeps coming up and showing up in your ear, the things that you're saying to yourself throughout your day. If you can notice what they are, you can start to implement self-compassion and you can start to build in ways of being kinder to yourself throughout the day. That's the first bucket. The second one is setting realistic expectations for yourself. We know most big changes take time. You can't train for a marathon in a week. You have to give yourself months to do it. And while we'd love to get done with everything and be thriving in our new lives in this new future tomorrow, it does help to be realistic about what you can accomplish. When we talk about changing jobs or dealing with a layoff, it could be that you need to recognize you truly can't apply for jobs for 8 hours a day. I've talked to many people who have tried to do this and they drive themselves nuts because they have an expectation that they will work for the same number of hours that they were working at their previous job, and they will do all of this with the same level of intensity that they did their previous job. And truly, it takes a different kind of energy. Maybe they're going through one of those emotional cycles that we talked about a little bit earlier. So it's okay to manage to your energy and do a bunch of work when you're feeling that push, and maybe taking yourself for a walk in the afternoon when you're not feeling it. You can't go faster than how you can go for yourself. So realistic expectations help here. Support systems are big. We talked about this a little bit earlier, but if you've left behind a group that provided a lot of support for you, whether that was colleagues or mentors at a job, or people who are in an organization, or if you've moved physically or are moving, your neighbors are going to change, your community is going to change. You may not have the same type of support around you. So seeking out people who are either going through a similar change or people who are doing the thing that you want to be doing. Like if, say, for example, you want to switch industries or you want to become a consultant or a coach in your next chapter. If everybody you know works in corporate jobs, you don't have a group of people around you who can truly support you as you're thinking about that chapter because they just don't know it. That was something that happened to me. I realized after I had left my corporate career, almost everybody I knew, all my friends from business school, all my friends from work, had basically the one type of life, right? They were all people who were working full-time for someone else. So as I started to think about entrepreneurship and building something for myself, I had to go out and find a bunch of new people to be my support system because I needed people who understood what I was going through and what I was doing. So support systems are big. Patience is important, patience with yourself, patience with time. If we think about that kid learning how to ride their bike, the same principle applies here. You're not going to get it your first time out. You have to give yourself a little bit of patience for failure and patience for those learnings. And celebrating small wins. So this could be a habit around gratitude. It could be capturing your journey. If you like to journal, journaling about it. If you do videos, do that. If you do something else, write down a few things you're proud of each week. Maybe it's having little milestones and goals along the way. And the reality is you're probably making progress, even if you can't always see it out of the forward view that most of us look through. So sometimes it does help to take that rear view mirror and say, hey, what did I do in the last week that I think was great? What did I do in the last month that moved me forward? And making sure that you're not just thinking about all the things you haven't done, but also celebrating the things you have done. So these are things, like I said, self-compassion isn't necessarily about bubble baths and face masks. It's about all of these things that take care of that very messy journey and make the journey more bearable and sometimes even fun as you're going through a big transition. With all of this in mind, thinking about your own journey, so taking yourself back to what we were talking about with that future vision, pick 2 things, and you don't have to commit to them forever, but choose 2 things that you will do, that you'll be accountable to yourself for. It could be experiments, it could be a new habit, but actually write them down. So the 3 things that you thought might come up during the journey, we captured those. Now we want to capture 2 things that you will do to show yourself self-compassion and love during the transition. So take a moment to think about that. Write them on your paper, write them in your worksheet, capture them somewhere, because the science of accountability is if you write it down and if you share it with someone else, you are much more likely to follow through on it. So I'll give you a moment to do that. And if anybody has something that they want to share with us, I would love to hear what commitments you're making and what actions that you'll be taking. So if you're willing to share, drop it in the chat. I'd love to see that. Hopefully you've got a couple things that you can think about. Chad's going to give himself a true day of rest each week. That's fantastic. So hopefully you've got a couple things. Oh, we've got some coming through. Give myself grace in my thoughts and celebrate the small wins. Self-compassion and celebrating the small wins, rewiring how I talk to myself and using the wins as proof or reasoning that progress is being made, even if it wasn't the progress I thought it should be. That's so beautiful, Ashley. Being patient, catching negative thoughts and replacing them with progress and accomplishments. These are great. Thank you all for sharing them and for writing them down, because now there's a much greater chance that you'll have them stuck in your head. Okay, I have one last fun activity for you. And this is perfect timing because we've got Valentine's Day right around the corner. So we're going to take a minute to write a love letter to ourselves from the future. And this is something we do in a lot of our workshops. So I've got a form for you that you can either access on that same link that's in the chat, or if you want to scan the QR code and do it on your phone, you can do that. And it'll pull up. Thank you so much for sharing that one more time. It'll pull up a page. You put in your name and your email address, and then you can answer a few questions. Thinking as your future self, you're going to think about a few of these questions. Drop your answers in. It doesn't have to be complete sentences. It doesn't have to be complete thoughts or anything like that. You hit submit, and you'll get a very cute love letter from your future self right back to your email in a few minutes. So you can do it now. You can save the link for later if you want to think about it. These tools are here for you. You can use them as many times as you want. They're fun to play with. Share it with your friends if you think they might like to do it. But if you want to check that out right now, it usually takes a couple minutes to get your love letter back. So I'll give you a moment to look at that before we wrap up. Thank you for joining, Brittany. And if you haven't saved the link to do the thank you letter, I highly recommend it. It's kind of a fun thing to play with on your own time if you have to drop. All right, has anyone gotten their letter back yet after doing the form? All right, well, in the interest of time, I will leave that with you to do after the session if you want. It's fun. It's nice to take a moment to say thank you to yourself. It's nice to think about the things you would say to yourself that are kind in the way that you would say them to anybody else that you love. So take that and have fun with it. And my last question for you, one last reflection before we wrap this up, is to just think about what are you learning from this session and what are you taking away from it? We've talked about how transitions work. We've talked about what happens inside our heads. We've talked about different ways to be compassionate with ourselves and several other things. So take a moment to just think about what you'll be bringing forward from the session. All right. So with that, I hope you enjoy the Valentine's letters that you're going to write to yourselves. And I hope that you've got your couple of things that you're ready to go forth and try in the vein of self-compassion this week. So thank you so much for having this conversation today. Thank you to the Kirkwood team for sponsoring this conversation during our Valentine's week. And please reach out if you want to stay connected. I love to talk about this stuff. This is my true passion and purpose. So this is how you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm all over the place. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Katie. And before you all go, if you have any questions, now's the time to put them in the chat. I also just sent through a quick poll to see what you thought of today's session and what other sessions we can offer you in the future. This is your free hour of professional development, so we want to make sure it's what you want. If you could take a minute just to fill that out, I'd appreciate it. Thank you, Chad. It's very kind of you. And if you don't have any questions, feel free to jump off and get back to your day. We appreciate you spending this snowy afternoon with us, though. Thank you so much.